All right. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome. We can't wait. We're so excited to have you join us for Where Learning Design and Generative AI Meet. This is going to be a really exciting session. Just to introduce myself very briefly, my name is Kristin Torrence. I'm head of learning engineering here at Talespin. And in my role, I'm responsible for a lot of the learning design and measurement, and now the Gen AI R&D as applied to learning design here. And I have the amazing pleasure of being up here today with our CEO and co-founder, Kyle Jackson. Kyle, would you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're too kind. So Kyle Jackson, CEO and founder here at Talespin. I guess a little about the background. Prior to Talespin, spent a career in media entertainment. Kind of always at the bleeding edge of technology, new workflows, and content paradigms. And started at Talespin about 8 years ago. We're going to be a lot of the topic that we're talking about today is I think a big part of the reason why I felt we needed to start this, and now here we are, right in the middle of it. So it's a really exciting time for what we see ahead, but also it is the challenge that we kind of started the company to try and solve. So this is a pleasure to be on this one.
Absolutely. Yeah, so in our conversation today, we'll really be focused on the intersection of generative AI and learning design. Specifically, diving into our journey of exploring applicable Gen AI use cases. So you'll see how we found value in generative AI tools, really supporting intelligence augmentation and product development on our end. And also, we'll talk about how we went about integrating Gen AI tools like ChatGPT, Elicit, Perplexity, Midjourney, right, into our learning design processes to produce XR modules, and how you can do the same for your learning design processes as well. So just a little bit of background info. So here at Talespin, we create immersive and interactive conversationally based training that can be accessed using virtual reality headsets or on the browser. And just to set the context, when we think about learning design, it's within the structure of a conversational narrative, right? And learning happens as the story unfolds and as learners really engage in these realistic conversations with the virtual humans that they're sitting across. And so some of the elements that are at the core of how we design are things like situating learners in authentic contexts, solving relevant and real-world problems, right? Conversing with virtual humans that both look and sound real, and in a way that feels natural to the learner. And now, although we design for 3D spatial environments, we do follow a similar learning design process as you would for any other modality. So as you can see, we could begin with discovery. We conduct a needs analysis and really truly understand the problem that we're trying to solve and the behavior change that we're trying to create. Then we do things like consult with subject matter experts and dive deep into the content and really grasp what we need to teach. We conceptualize things like our learning design, right? We define how our learning solution will then create that behavior change that we want to see. And after designing, we go into developing our learning solution. Now for us, that means authoring using our no-code authoring tool, Copilot Designer. You may have other authoring tools that you use to create your learning experiences as well. And then we deploy, right? So we make our solution available to learners. And then, this also goes without saying, but also definitely worth saying, is that this is an iterative process. We're user testing, we're collecting feedback from stakeholders and subject matter experts throughout. So our process really does mirror that of any other modality here. Now with Gen AI tools on the scene, they're now readily available. And we really saw their potential to transform the way we do things at Talespin, particularly when it came to learning design. There are a number of different opportunities that are, probably quite obvious to our use case, right? in relation to learning design, like content generation or dynamic animation of characters within the experiences. But then there are things that are not as obvious, right? Things like world creation and measurement of learning. And Kyle, I actually want to throw this over to you. I have a quick question. So which of these use cases are you most excited about?
I mean, they're each so unique, right? As you dive into these different areas and start to unpack them. But I think the one that stands out is definitely the measurement, because and we'll obviously unpack this later, but it flips a lot of, I think, some of the constructs of how learning measurement has been done in the past a little bit on their head, but in a way that I think is really needed. So I think the measurement one is the one that stands out the most to me in terms of just like truly groundbreaking. Of course, all this stuff is amazing, and it's when you see it for the first time, you're like, wait, how does that happen? But yeah, I think the measurement is where we're going to see some really meaningful changes.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Measurement is, I think one of the things I'm definitely keeping my eye on here, and one of the things most near and dear to my heart. But I also would say that I'm very excited about the content design and learning design portion of generative AI's applicability. And then, I would probably say that the most impactful benefit that I think we predicted is reduced time to create a VR learning experience, right? So if you take a look at 2018, it took 5 months to create a VR module, right? And then with the trajectory of our findings from, our internal pilots, the advancements of technology, continued research, we anticipate that it will take less than 30 minutes to create a full VR experience in the next 6 to 9 months, right? These advances, when applied to the creation of immersive experiences, they will truly revolutionize learning.
And that's what we've been finding around, just to put that in context, right? 5 months was a 25 to 30 minute, conversational VR simulation back in 2018. It's also the same like benchmark, when you're looking to first half this year and the end of the year with what we think that will take to create the same content. So that's pretty wild.
It's an exciting time for sure.
Yeah. So this is an interesting moment of reflection, right? When you look back on that previous slide and you start thinking about, okay, well, what does this actually mean for learning design, for how we're applying these solutions into organizations and how we're ultimately helping individuals, through, what is going to be a big transition, which I'll unpack. But one of the things that dawned on us as we were working with one of our partners is this concept of just, historically, we've always fought for time, quality, and cost. It's just been this awful set of trade-offs that we all have to make because we all have high standards and we want to deliver excellent things. And it's always, not enough time, not enough, cost, and oftentimes not the quality that we would like. And so, but what we saw is that collapses with this, with these systems. And that gets really exciting because if those aren't the trade-offs that you're making anymore, we started to ask ourselves, what are the trade-offs? What do we need to be thinking about? And so, we came up with the idea of kind of relevance, priority, and experience being the things that you're really focusing on and making trade-offs around. And this isn't, this, I would say this is definitely not a prediction, right? This is more like, I think, what we're seeing now within our own cycles as we start to create content. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And especially even, in the learning space, when we're thinking about learning experiences that we're putting in front of folks, right? That differentiator is really going to be that quality, right? How relevant is it to their day-to-day job? Is it targeting the learning needs that need to be addressed for them specifically, right? It definitely enables things like personalized and adaptive learning and providing a more enriching experience.
Yeah, maybe go to the next one because now it's my turn to talk a little bit. So that was really good background and context, just specifically the Tailspin, but also just where we're starting to apply it. And then we're going to kind of unpack those applications a bit. But if we pull ourselves up for a moment, we're kind of, where is learning being applied today and why, I guess is where I would kind of frame this. And so, and directly related to generative AI as well, right? Because these things actually are overlapping in many ways. Because of how transformative this is. So if you read the headlines, you see, studies coming out from Goldman Sachs or Penn and OpenAI predicting, huge, jobs impact at the hands of generative AI. And we'll unpack that a little bit. But as you move across, you can start to ask those questions. So what is that impact going to look like? Where are skills needs going to be? And then what is it over what time and what's that transition? And so, some of the headlines that you see further to the right, Financial Times, human skills will be vital for the future of jobs. And that's where we start to get more interested as Tailspin, because that's the area we're applying it to. So, next one, Kristin. So, just this last month, the World Economic Forum published their kind of annual or biannual look at the future of jobs, and it connects a lot with these headlines into, I think, some more meaningful data. And so they looked across thousands of employees, I believe thousands of companies, and roughly I think it's 49 markets if I recall. But it was a very global view, and so. With that view, they kind of said, we expect roughly 152 million jobs to be, change hands. So it's kind of that question of, lost jobs versus gained jobs, and roughly 23% of the workforce are gonna fall into that category. But as you click deeper and you go to the next one, it's not necessarily about the lost and gained jobs. It's just about skill transformation, and we see that very, very intimately when we're applying this to any of the different practices of Tailspin. Because it becomes really obvious pretty quick as to, oh wait, I'm not going to need to do these things anymore. I'm going to need to do these things, or now it opens up my opportunity to do things that I can never find time to do. And so we think this statistic's a lot more interesting, especially as it relates to learning design, because you see, the estimates ranging from roughly 44% to up towards about 80%, where there's going to be skill transformation, which just means we don't come to work and do the same things anymore. We do things differently. And so that's a lot. That is a large swath of the workforce. And so, and these predictions are talking about the next 5 years. And just even internally, as we've reflected on the use of this and integrating it into the tooling, I don't think that that's necessarily too aggressive. And so, so what do you do, right? Like this is now we're dealing with a scale of transformation, scale of learning needs at a pace and a scale that we haven't necessarily seen before. And luckily we're seeing, if you read that top bar on the right, we see that employers are ready and are leaning into training on the job. And I think equally interesting is the second bar, which is there's also seen an acceleration of automation of processes. In a lot of our customer conversations, that's actually, it's not their first choice in some cases, or in a lot of cases. It's the second choice. And the reason it's happening is because of that skill transformation, not happening fast enough. Like work needs to change faster than we can find people to fill it. And so then we see a lot of people reverting to automation to try and backstop those problems. So I think there's a very high correlation between those two balancing each other. And really, it comes back to how quickly can we focus on the skills that are needed. So one of the other things that they publish every year is the next slide, which is what are those skills. And so this list is the list that I was started. This and some others like it were the ones that I was following when we started Talespin back 8 years ago now. And at that point in time, it was very much about coding talent. AI and ML was, I think, creeped onto that list at some point, at number 10. But what's interesting, right, is over time, a lot of those skills seem to be trending down, and what we see is trending up is these like uniquely human skills. So, and that was kind of the focus of why where we wanted to apply generative AI. And so from a Talespin perspective, right, we look at that curiosity and lifelong learning. We look at the critical and creative and analytical thinking, systems thinking, motivation and self-awareness, resilience, flexibility, and agility. So about, I would say, roughly 60, 70% of this list is kind of in focus for what we think our approach of leveraging generative AI could be applied to, and this new modality. So one more. So when you look at and you reflect on that list, right? We're now in this area where there is, and Kristin, you mentioned it, right? There's a lot of behavioral change and mindset change inside those skills. And so historically, when we were trying to teach people knowledge, right? Like, hey, I need you to understand history, or I need you to understand this piece of knowledge to do your work. We used a lot of the top part of the pyramid here, lectures, reading, audiovisual materials, demonstration materials to do that. And it was kind of passively learned, and then the retention for reasons of our own physiology was often not great, right? And so that's the percentages you see as you move down that pyramid. The challenge here is these skills are behavioral, they're mindset, and so you need to be in that ability to practice and apply, discuss, and teaching others. So that's a very active learning mode, and that's where simulation and immersion becomes so powerful. So we look at that, hey, 70% of this problem, if you look at those skills in demand, fall into a part of the pyramid that we've never been able to really scale before. And that's really challenging. So, at the most fundamental level, one of our colleagues, Kyle Nell, used this recently at a talk he was giving, and I said, it's so simple but so articulate. It's not about knowing the answer anymore; it's about knowing the question, and that's where systems thinking, creative thinking, all of those things that were on that list really fall into. So, conversations are a great way to practice figuring out how to work through that, and so that's where we've been applying it. And I think this is the macro picture for why we think leveraging generative AI in this area is going to be so impactful. So, and I guess the point of putting this in is this is a big problem, right? That we're talking about here in terms of this transition and this investment that needs to happen in our people. And so, we've been working towards using this modality now for a while, and we definitely know it works. We're seeing, and every company in the kind of XR space has similar statistics in terms of the exponential outcomes. So we know it works. We also know that learners want it, which is really important, because this has to be a leaned in activity now, right? This is one of the things that we've been starting to use a lot internally is thinking about learning like fitness. So it's a daily activity. It's like, I get my steps in, where am I? How do I benchmark myself? And making that less of a traditional view of, especially in the enterprise world, a traditional view of corporate learning. Yeah. So crossing into a new paradigm.
Yes, we are in a new paradigm, right? Or as you mentioned, Kyle, we've really recognized the power of immersive learning. And really, we have the ability to create these captivating learning experiences that target those key skills that folks will need to succeed. So in terms of the sorts of experience that we offer, right? So active learning is really at the forefront of all of our learning experiences. And it's essential that in these immersive worlds, learners are active in engaging in these conversations. They're situated in these very authentic and realistic environments dealing with real world problems. And you can see here, and there are 5 different environments, right, in this immersive virtual story world. And, throughout their experiences in these immersive learning experiences, we've really seen the power of having these AI co-pilots shown here that really guide learners along their learning journey and help them throughout by coaching them, providing feedback. And we've been able to accomplish that with the power of Copilot Designer, our no-code authoring tool. And I want to show this video really just for context, because this is the world and really the constructs in which we apply our thinking from a Gen AI standpoint. So next, we'll share our journey of integrating Gen AI tools into our learning design workflows, and really how you can potentially follow these same steps to identify where in your learning design workflows Gen AI can help expedite your processes. So our first phase began with research and development for content creation. We took a look at really what tools were on the market and did some heavy experimenting with them. Then we asked the question, where can these tools really add value for us? So we experimented to identify what use cases of generative AI tools were really applicable to the work that we do. And once we had those, we could then stress test those tools for those specific purposes within our workflow, right? Truly evaluate the value add against our business as usual, essentially. And in this phase, we got very clear on where Gen AI tools could really help optimize our processes. And after which, our question then became, how do we do this at scale? So this is where our standard operating procedure comes into play. And Kyle, actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you were heavily involved in the first initial conceptualization of our SOP.
Went down the rabbit hole big time. And yeah. I mean, the problem I think that we were trying to solve is multi-dimensional here. First was empowering others that are coming new into this specific space with the best practices and the learnings that we had achieved to be able to get to that same kind of law of acceleration. But also trying to figure out like how can we rise the quality of all content that's being created on our platform, but also just one of the things that we started to discover as we got down the rabbit hole on the SOP is it applies so many other places in the business. And so, here we're really sharing kind of some of the details of the learning design SOP, but it quickly birthed the life into marketing, into development, into character creation, into world creation, into animation systems. And so, highly recommend, taking a similar process, because I think the discovery along the journey it really kind of leads its own life almost.
Absolutely. And that initial generation of our SOP really led into the creation of our next thing, which is our prompt library, right? And so we were able to align the elements of our SOP against the different prompts that we were engineering to really help scale these efforts. So once we were able to do that, really our next endeavor was evaluating how much of an impact Gen AI made to our workflow. So we kicked off our first customer module created in collaboration with generative AI tools. And it's really a comprehensive and pretty complex module. It has 5 different conversations. And really at this point of time, we were experimenting with a number of different generative AI tools, including ChatGPT, Midjourney, Elicit, and SciSpace to really augment our workflow. And it produced favorable results, especially when it came to speed and efficiency.
I think the other thing that I saw unfold with that, Kristin, is just the rich nature of the worlds became something that would develop more quickly. You know, one of the things that we've seen, again, kind of kind of specific to XR, you're creating these immersive worlds. And so world design, world building isn't something that everybody is trained in. And so, having this kind of dance partner that you start to work with when these generative tools, I think I saw that bring world building to life for the whole group much more quickly. So that's something that kind of, the outcome of that, right, is the ability to build 5 modules that are rich in nature, that all interact with each other, because you've built the world, you built the convincing world, and that's more true to life. So I think that's the piece that I saw really go from something that only like the top 5% of people can do well to something that the team could do well, right? And that's the type of ahas that I keep seeing with just generative AI tool implementation.
Yeah, and just to add to that example, we've seen that the concept art that's created during the ideation phase when we're doing our design documentation, on the learning and narrative design piece, that really helped with collaborating with art, right? To really help make these virtual worlds come to life and realize them in an actual 3D environment. So we've seen that collaboration a little bit more streamlined as well, I'd say. So, those findings really led our learning services team to adopt these tools for learning and narrative design. So specifically leverage them for things like researching topics or prepping for subject matter expert interviews, drafting learning objectives, or identifying skills that needed to be both assessed and designed for. Brainstorming realistic scenario contexts and character personas of the virtual humans that learners will be engaging with in these conversational narratives. Art direction, right, as I just mentioned, of both virtual human art, but also environmental art. And then conversational outlining and scripting. And really what this adoption looked like was providing the standard operating procedure and prompt library to the team members and hosting prompt engineering workshops for our learning services team to really help upskill on generative AI tools. And really want to emphasize this again, and Kyle emphasized it earlier, really how important it is, and it was for our process to really break down and operationalize our SOP to an individual task level, right? It not only brought clarity and consensus around our processes and procedures, but also clarity around which Gen AI tools are well suited for certain tasks and the prompts that have led to successful outputs. So this was, yeah.
I was just going to add the context that we've been doing all this in is that the technology, I wouldn't say is easy because there's all sorts of challenges with the technology too. But the idea of just being able to hook up generative means to a character doesn't necessarily deliver on the kind of key impacts and learning outcomes that I think we have to be really laser focused on, and so we've been thinking about it as maybe a few steps deeper, right? Like how do we develop personas that are absolutely rich in nature and believable? How do we develop content that doesn't have bias? How do we ensure learning outcomes that are going to double, triple down on this category and this type of approach? And then also just how do you do that at scale repeatedly? And there is no silver bullet yet, from a generative AI perspective in that regard. If you have those requirements, and also how do you do that in an enterprise, ready way, right? Because all of these things are so new that there are a lot of restrictions on where tools get used and how they get exposed to employees or customers or whatever the community is that you're trying to teach. So we thought breaking it down at this ingredient level would help us unpack that, so that as we get back towards tooling and trying to accelerate the tooling, we've really thought through this in a meaningful way, so that we can do it at scale. So it was kind of part of our requirement, but I think by doing it that way, we also had a lot of findings just about the maturity of the tools, what worked, what definitely doesn't work, things like that I remember just lots of conversations we went, looking at just one of these blocks. It's like, this is not ready for prime time there. We would never put that type of an output in front of, a business leader or a learner. It just isn't ready. And so that was this discovering process, or this SOP process led to, I think, very intentional discovery that was part of our goal of scalable kind of enterprise generative learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I would say that it also definitely enabled our experimentation and solutioning around some of those earlier applications that we touched upon, right? The content design generation, the skills measurement, and being able to do that in a very strategic and systematic way, to know that we are designing specifically for those things to then measure against, the outcomes that we expect. Also, it enabled things like identifying where tool stacking, which is using multiple AI tools in conjunction with one another to really achieve our desired outcomes, like where those were most beneficial, I'd say. For instance, when we do domain research or content topic research, we found that stacking tools like Elicit and SciSpace and with ChatGPT to synthesize the research was extremely beneficial and efficient as well. Things like scenario brainstorming, right? We ended up stacking tools such as Perplexity, ChatGPT, and Bard together to really get some really high fidelity scenario brainstorms. And then, as mentioned earlier, right, we stacked ChatGPT and Midjourney together to get very detailed and I would say just very detailed character and environment concept art that then was able to really come to life. Then we were able to really stress test our SOP and prompt library, right? So doing this at a much larger scale, creating 12 XR modules that took place within really the same cinematic universe. And in terms of this research pilot, our efficiency, we were able to produce modules 50% faster compared to our standard creation process. Some other findings were that we found that those with higher domain expertise, right, expertise in a particular area, were able to leverage Gen AI tools to create higher quality deliverables with higher efficiency than those who were maybe less experienced in a particular domain. And the applications of Gen AI to processes of instructional design and narrative design also serve to be, more fruitful, which is a finding that, we are very extremely happy and excited to run with and continue to evolve. But something definitely worth noting that, we've also found that it's even more critical that we engage with subject matter experts, sensitivity readers, right, to ensure that our content that we're using is accurate, right? So we're not spreading misinformation, and really to ensure that we're not perpetuating any biases or stereotypes that may have crept in with the use of generative AI. So how can you support your team's adoption of generative AI tools? So some strategies that have worked for us include cultivating communities of practice within and across departments, and really sharing findings, encouraging folks to share their findings in forums such as Slack. Another thing you can do is encourage experimentation by hosting design jams. I know a learning services team has a weekly design jam, and different departments at Talespin have their own internal design challenges that they do. And actually, we have a hackathon using Gen AI coming up very soon. And so that's just some very exciting internal Talespin sort of strategies that we've used to both upskill and experiment and push the boundaries of Gen AI.
Yeah, the other thing on both these last 2 points you're walking through, Kristin, is we really pulled different skill areas and roles into the process in a way that wouldn't, I think, historically, been the production pipeline. So I remember when you guys were doing the 12 modules in learning services, you said everyone's a writer, everyone's a creator, everyone's a producer now. Like instead of these siloed roles, and with Gen AI, you saw this skill blending, and you saw this ability for people to do things that weren't maybe traditionally inside of their remit, right, or their area of expertise. Similar with the hackathon, we're playing the same thing. It's like everybody's on the field because there's just really interesting unlocks that happen when the superpower becomes the ability to ask the question. That's the superpower with this technology, and so it's about that framing, and it's about maybe a unique experience that you have, that the way you frame it gets some really unique outcome, and we've seen that all over the place, and from the way that we're approaching making art for certain series that are being published, to the way that we're approaching even some of the development and coding problems. So I would definitely recommend pull everybody in, right? I think that's part of what's at least internally been so magical to see happen, is that blending of different ways to approach the questioning.
Absolutely. I think where the innovation and comes in is that blend of cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary folks on the team sharing ideas and seeing things from different perspectives that they may have not been privy to or exposed to without that sort of cross-departmental engagement. Other things you may be able to do is host regular knowledge share sessions and with routine office hours to facilitate upskilling. We have sort of some dedicated folks who host the knowledge shares and also host office hours. And then most importantly, we made our prompt library accessible to all internal team members and external clients, really as a key resource and also a jumping off point for those who have less experience using Gen AI tools.
So maybe pull it back up, and then we've got some really great questions as well that I want to make sure we have time to address. So we asked ourselves the question is why, the topic of generative AI we've been speaking about is process improvements and unlocking kind of abilities to make things faster, better, higher quality. But there's also this other concept of generative learning. So is there a point in time where there isn't the human loop? What does that look like? How do we set the boundaries? How do we set the parameters? Why would we want it? What are the jobs to be done? And so, we think there is. We think there's a value to this concept of generative learning. And that's because if you go back up to what we were talking about at the beginning, we've got such a massive skill transformation problem coming. The world is changing so quickly that our ability to, take a prescriptive approach to always, we've identified the problem, let's go build a solution for the problem, very likely is not going to be sufficient. And so the idea of generative learning is how do we build systems that actually can help to do that on their own. And a lot of what we're doing from a groundwork perspective, I think, is kind of informing and hardening our assumptions around how that's gonna take place. But really, it's why does it matter? And so we think from a learning leader or an HR leader, the job to be done here in this new world is I want to develop customized and personalized customized and personalized. The second one's just as important. L&D programs that are effective with minimal effort, because I've got so many things to solve, minimal effort, time, and cost that guaranteed delivered result or that deliver guaranteed results. So it's a big job to be done. And then from an employee, we also think about this skill transformation as intensely personal. I can't tell you how many times where we've opened up the conversation around generative AI, and the immediate first reaction is, what does it mean to me? Like, is my job threatened? Is my livelihood threatened? Is my future threatened? What does this look like? So from a learner perspective, the job to be done is there's too much changing. I want to feel confident and empowered in my professional development, knowing that the learning programs I engage in will protect and enhance my future. I need them to be relevant, and I need them to be engaging. And so those are big jobs to be done. And this immersive learning modality, I think, can deliver on it. And what we're starting to see is that we can get the content pipelines and parameters and bias measures and all these different little things that we talked about in here. We can get systems in place that maybe get us to the place where generative learning is actually realistic. And so the way we've been thinking about that, and there's a couple more slides to kind of walk through that journey. You go next one, Kristin. First is going back to something I saw in the chat, which is human in the loop. We're still thinking about this as humans will be the orchestrators of these technologies. That orchestration may change over time. Like right now, you see us being very actively. We are an intense dance partner with AI when we're doing it the way we're doing it right now. That will change. That dance will change, and we see kind of, I think, a pretty clear path as to how that will evolve. But really, from our perspective, we're trying to orchestrate these kind of core components, right? Those large language models, these generative AI voices and characters, and these generative 3D worlds. And if we can pull those things together in a real-time fashion, then you've got there from an immersive generative learning perspective. So the chapters we think to do that are the next one. So right now you saw Kristin walk through some of the SOP and the phase that we've been in now for the last year, which is generative AI as a complementary design tool with humans in the loop. There's a really accelerating process, and honestly, it's shoring up some of the biggest frictions that we've seen from an XR adoption standpoint, which is that intense investment is taken to create content that fits your need. And the timeline is taken. We've seen that friction for now 8 years be a blocker to multiple phases of XR kind of rollout. So the fact that that's now compressed is huge. That really is going to help, I think, get us to these next phases, which is phase 2 is what we're working on now, which is taking a lot of this detailed work and research and discovery and embedding certain parts of it into the tooling to help with narrative writing, with module definition, and with creative ideation. So again, human in the loop, but taking that and pushing it right into your flow of work so that you can create even faster. You can have that kind of dance partner right there with you. And then by the time we get to the third phase, which a month is forever these days. So these phases aren't very long. But basically, by the time we get to the third phase, which is we think is end this year, maybe early next, that's where you get to that idea of real time and generative open-ended conversations or open worlds. So that's a little bit of just some framing for where we think this goes. And then maybe one more point before we jump to some questions. Kristin, your last slide. This is the way we kind of view the transition that we're in when you connect all of these dots. So historically, we've had this linear model where problem identification, you try to fight the time, quality, and cost triangle to build something to go after and tackle that problem and improve the outcomes you're going after. And where we're going now is as you unblock those things, right? Unblock that time, quality, cost pyramid. You get to this other type of what we've just been kind of internally saying, like more of a multi-spectrum human capital model. And the idea here is it is adaptive to the learner. There's no reason why learning has to be in this world with this type of cost and time to create or fully generative. There's no reason the learning needs to be, the average of a group of very different people, right? Let's actually design for the learner and try to bring them forward the quickest way we can. It can be adaptive to the business. One of the things that generative learning gets a lot of positive feedback when we talk about it with customers. Is if there's been an issue that came up in your business on Friday, could I literally have something immersive to address that issue that I can put out to my employee base on Monday? And historically, yeah, if it's a text-based thing, yes, maybe a video-based thing, you could triage, but this is obviously bringing a whole different set of tools to that fight. We do believe it will be created on the fly eventually. We do believe strongly, obviously, in immersive delivery. The category of immersive, I think, is going to continue to advance, and so this idea of fully immersed world in a VR headset that most people might associate with that today, I think will probably evolve. We've even seen some of that in the most recent Apple Vision Pro announcement, how they are starting to differentiate their approach. But the other piece that comes from that is very high retention and very deep measurement. And so those are things that we, as professionals trying to, support our people, haven't necessarily always been able to count on. So that's really exciting. And as it starts to happen, you start to really play with, as it starts to happen, and the deconstruction of jobs and all the other things that are going on that we've even just talked about within the learning design practice happens broadly, you're going to see a lot of other things happen within the organizational models. And so we closely follow, the idea of observed skills over resumes. We follow work without jobs. That's the deconstruction of jobs into tasks and automations, and where's human intelligence needed, where's artificial intelligence needed. And then that immediately falls into some other organizational concepts and remuneration concepts. So it's an exciting space, obviously, when you distill it all the way back down to just making really, really impactful learning modules. It's exciting at that level, and it's actually really enjoyable. I personally have seen a lot of our team just get into flow state, and it just becomes kind of this magical cycle to watch. But when you go all the way to the top level, obviously, these are some pretty exciting breakthroughs on the horizon, and we have to make them. At this point, unless somebody steps in and stops some of the things that are changing the workforce, which we don't think will happen, we have to go this direction. So I think that's all of our slides, which is a lot of slides. Thanks for sticking through all the slides. But we have some really good questions. So I'll pick a couple. I'll start with simple ones. Well, this one's not simple. Did you face any legal or copyright issues? How did you determine what you could use for generative AI like ChatGPT? And so this the experimentation right now has been largely internal and for off-the-shelf content. So starting to work with those models with customers now, and we're seeing different policies depending on the enterprise, depending on the sector. And so, but some of the tools that Kristin, you were mentioning, as research tools and Elicit and SciSpace, and those is a way to kind of, fact check and do some of that work. Of course, there's areas and use cases where companies aren't going to be comfortable using, generative or large language models for a little while. So it's been very, very specific to where we've been applying it, taking that into mind. Maybe you would pick one, Kristin.
Sure. I saw a question, how are you measuring outcomes with generative AI? So a lot of the pilots that we've done so far internally, what we were actually looking to measure were things like speed, efficiency, quality. And so from our pilots, we were collecting both qualitative and quantitative data from the team. And then also our team during this pilot study kept daily journals that we were then able to analyze. And so, we were really trying to triangulate all of the data that we could in terms of figuring out, how much does Gen AI optimize our processes? And then in terms of using generative AI for measuring outcomes of learners within our learning experiences, because we are sort of a skills focused company, a lot of the way in which we measure learning is through skill demonstration. So it's very empirical from that standpoint of like, we only score what we see learners observe through their choices within the virtual reality experience. And we found methods of Gen AI utilizing the rubric that we've created and following the protocol that we use internally to then try and score that skill demonstration through a VR experience.
I think there's another question kind of related to that, which is, can you elaborate more on observed skills over CVs? And so, yes, this is like a real core area of belief for us, which is as you go to active learning, as you go to true demonstration, and demonstration specifically, I guess, in software worlds, we can measure a lot of the user's interactions to be a true validation of that skill or demonstration of that skill. And so, and you see similar things happening. I always like to use, oh gosh, I'm going to forget the name of it all of a sudden. Oh gosh, there's a coding development learning platform for developers, Foresight. There we go. That is both a teaching and testing environment. So it's like a simulation environment itself. And so inside of that environment, obviously you can validate skills very accurately. And so I think we see this potential emerging more broadly, and therefore, if we can actually have validated skills, that would be much better than a CV in many ways. And so it probably ends up being a mixture, but we're constantly in the discussions around this topic and following kind of the credentials as a software kind of movement. And then of course there's the broader topic of like, well, how does the blockchain play in that? How does that actually happen at scale in a validated way? Which there's some really, really interesting developments happening there. So I do think it will go that direction. It's not going to happen fast.
Yeah, and another question that we have is, what text-to-speech apps have you had success for generating voiceover recordings? I know that we've found a lot of success using Azure within CPD. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different ones, and I would definitely recommend people experiment. But one of the challenges that we often have faced is we're trying to build something that's robust and is not going to break on people as their enterprise use of it scales. And there's a lot of early breakthroughs in this voice space, and so we've actually implemented some of those early breakthroughs from other companies into the platform for them to either get bought by another company or go away. And so it is a really quickly moving space. So I think you have to put that in your decision matrix. Ones that really stand out, Well Said and 11 Labs are two that are just excellent. Like the quality that they're creating is phenomenal, much better than we're getting with Azure. But it depends on what you're measuring, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, here's a good one. Is there a way for freelance creators and independent consultants to learn CPD tools so we can promote it to our client base? There is. We're getting there. We've been building out. Kristin alluded to the prompt library, and we've been building out kind of the educational and knowledge-based tools to make that easy and more self-service. So we're just about there. I would say reach out about the partner program, and we'll definitely we're heading in that direction. That's our goal. We just had to get more. We had honestly just had more work to do to get it built properly to support people in that journey. Dawn asked, "Oh, how many people on your core team?" So yeah, we've got about 100 of us at Talespin, and then through extension, another large community, but about 100 of us on the core team.
There's a question: how lean is your approach to ideation with generative AI and other new tools that you are working on? I would say that it is very lean, moving at the speed of light almost. We had tested rigorously and fast. You know, when something comes on the market, we are really trying to see where these tools can really help optimize our workflows. And, you know, it's really a key focus for us, I would say, and something that we put a lot of effort into identifying, you know, really taking that tool and putting it through those steps and then turning around to see what we can do with it and push it to its limits. Kyle, would you want to add anything to that?
I mean, it's, you know, we have an AI at Talespin channel internally, and the number of things that break every single day that the team is monitoring is just fascinating to watch. So I think if you're doing anything other than lean right now, you're probably either building yourself a lot of tech debt or may not be fully understanding the opportunities that are coming. So that's also a bit of why we've taken the approach to the kind of platform development and the multiple chapters here that we have to go through, and so that we can do, again, do this at scale. Like, we want to help the 152 million people that we talked about at the top. We want to make sure that we're serving those several hundred million people that are gonna need these types of things. Here's a good one. What's your current and expected division between use of learning on VR and headsets versus in the browser? And what extent is the hardware limiting factor? So we have about 70% of our customers that use both. And that was something that I think is a testament to where people want to go. They want to steer towards, you know, using more and more of the immersive tools, but the headsets, the capex of that is a blocker right now. And I think it's mostly a blocker, not from I think the learning ROI is so clear that people aren't really questioning that, but they're going, well, if I'm buying a headset, I need multiple use cases. And so what we see a lot of people trying to connect the dots between multiple use cases to justify that at larger scale for purchase. But we are consistently seeing, you know, thousands or, you know, of headsets being purchased by an organization. So I think we're going to see that shift, you know, accelerate over the next 12 to 24 months as we just get more and more robust solutions in the market. So we're almost at time. We got one more. You can pick the last one.
Can we continue this conversation?
Yes, we can.
Absolutely.
I don't know where or how, because we've got a lot of people, but let's figure out how to do that. We can, when we post this on our YouTube channel, what we do is we can update some of the last slides to figure out a way to kind of continue the conversation as a community. That'd be great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope that you found this valuable, and thank you so much, Kyle, for your time and sharing your expertise with us. This has been fantastic, and I hope everyone enjoys their Thursday.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.